All right, everyone. Welcome to this 11th episode of the Single Source, the product data podcast by PIMVendors.com. I'm Stefan Spaggers. I'm the co-founder of PIMVendors and, well, your host for this session. And I'm joined today by Helen Grimster and Krebs Jolse, who will quickly introduce themselves after the housekeeping. So we are doing a live session, which means you can interact with us on YouTube or on LinkedIn, where we are both live. And we're keeping an eye on the comments. If you have any questions or comments that you want to share with us, just let us know. We're making a recording, and you can, of course, always follow us on the podcast platform of your choice, be that Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or for the hipsters out there on YouTube as well. And of course, check out our website if you want to have more product information, product data information. Maybe one specific highlight before I hand off to Helen and Chris to introduce themselves is our offline event coming in the beginning of October, where in the center of the Netherlands, we'll be introducing you to more than 10 different solutions and solution providers that will present their customer cases to our audience of product data specialists. So if you would like to experience the world of product content, check out productcontenteurope.com and visit us live, see us live at the event in the beginning of October. Now, with that all out of the way, a quick round of introductions, and then I'll introduce the problem and topic of today, which is PIM selection. So something we know a bit about. Chris, maybe you first and then Helen?
Yeah. Chris Jobs, the co-founder also of PIM Vendors, and what I've done in the last 25 years is PIM and PIM selections and helping companies finding the right PIM. And I've seen this evolve over the years, and I think we can talk for hours on this topic. We'll limit it, I think, today to 1 hour, and I hope to give you as much as information as possible.
All right, Helen?
Hi, I'm Helen Grimster. I work at Syndigo. I cover PIM and MDM. I've been in the industry for quite some time. I used to work at Gartner and spent, I'd say, every day talking about this question, how do I choose a PIM and so on. Prior to that, I've worked for a number of other PIM and MDM vendors. So really looking forward to discussing this because it's a really interesting topic.
Yes, it is. I think maybe to kickstart, let's get the AI bit out of the way. It is a topic that covers and transforms every part of the PIM journey, be that the implementation and product data modeling, but also finds its way into the selection. And I think what we see, with every customer that we engage with, and I think rightly so, they did their research on ChatGPT or Claude. So these are very powerful tools that have, of course, a lot to say about why and how you should select the right fitting solution. But there's also sort of a word of warning here, because if you lack the right context, if you lack the right experience picking not just in the IT solution, but specifically a PIM or MDM solution, you don't know exactly which questions you want to ask and need to ask. And what we also see is the dark forces of generative engine optimization or search engine optimization at work, where if you ask ChatGPT for the best solutions for a certain category and certain value chain position, like best PIM for manufacturing or best PIM for wholesale or best PIM for retail, it generates short lists that we would not automatically say comply with the categorization. So there is definitely a value to using these tools, but I would say definitely don't fare blindly on their suggestions and just focus on the tools that they shortlist. There are more than 250 PIM solutions out there, and that might be a good place to start as well. We work closely with about 50 of them, where we think we cover the market quite well. But there's new PIM solutions coming out each week, I'd say. And the generative engines are not great at providing you with the best fitting list, even if you provided the right context. So just a quick word of warning. How How do you see that, Helen, or how do you see that, Chris?
I totally agree. I mean, it's of course it's can be a really good place to start, but there is obviously the bias, or and particularly if you're a smaller vendor or maybe more niche, you may not appear because you might not have actually been picked up. So, whilst of course it's a great place to start your research, as you absolutely said, you really want to make sure that you're focusing on the right set of vendors that will meet your requirements. So I wouldn't discount it, but really don't rely on it. I think that's my absolute take on it as well.
Yeah, I agree with that. And actually, you see the same pattern as when Google started. You end up when you ask for the best PIM, some PIM solutions end up on top, and it doesn't have to do always with the best PIM, but with the best marketed PIM or things like that. Um, I think that asking for the best PIM is a question which is actually a non-question because there is no best PIM. There is a best PIM for you, but not really in general.
That's actually a great point, Chris. Yeah, and there is a best PIM for you, but it always depends. And I think what we have found doing, well, maybe more than 10 PIM selections last year, but more, more than 50 maybe in the past years, is that um, we see of course customers bringing their own solutions into these short lists, but we are always able to make it a very difficult choice, which means that we're able to enhance the internal shortlist that you have, or even provide you with a full 5 solution shortlist that are really difficult to distinguish from a um, well, best value or best fit perspective when it comes to your organization, your use cases, your ambitions. Where what we usually see when a specialist is not involved, it is a short list of 3 solutions or 5, of which you can immediately scratch 3 after the first demo because they are totally a bad fit. They're a starter PIM for an enterprise customer or vice versa, or they totally don't connect with the requirements you actually have in your organization.
And then, of course, you have the functional requirements. That's where mostly we focus on. But there's also the financial requirements because there's a huge difference in pricing for several PIM solutions. And when you have a small budget, you come up with the pricing of an enterprise PIM solution. Maybe it's a functional fit, but not a financial fit. So that's also one of the topics we quite often see.
And I would just like to throw a spanner in the works and say it's not just a technology decision. You've also got to think about the fact that this is potentially going to be change management as well. And I think you need to think, will the technology be accepted and so on. So I think there's many different facets to choosing the right PIM. It might be that you've got to make sure that your users are actually going to accept the change as well.
Yeah, so preparation within the company is so important. It's not just IT department or marketing department, or you have to work on this together because it's a collaboration tool and you need to work together. You need to find the way how it will integrate in your processes.
All right. So, but like what we see usually is that people have some indication of their own requirements, right? That's where they start. They start um, preparing their PIM selection, maybe start with their own PIM and the frustrations they have today, but also, of course, come up with a list of requirements. What do we see going wrong when customers or prospects come with their own requirements to the table?
Personally, I think that there's a tendency to focus on the pain points of now. As in, this is what's not working for us, whether it's they've got so many spreadsheets and so on. But sometimes it isn't a tendency to be thinking about what do I need for the next 3 to 5 years from my PIM? What's my strategy moving forward? And I sometimes, when I was at Gartner, it would be very much about the technical capabilities when maybe they hadn't even thought about the outcomes that they're looking to achieve. So I think there's a massive value in the capabilities from a technical perspective, but my advice would always to be think about the pivot towards what are you trying to solve. That's just a first overall observation on when you get
Mm.
a massive list of requirements. And I'd also say, again, it could be that you've gone to AI and said, tell me what I should be looking for within a PIM without really thinking about, is it relevant for me? That's just my first sort of initial thoughts on the subject. Chris?
What sorry, what I agree with that, but what I see also is that the knowledge what a PIM can do for you is a lot of the times it's lacking. So it's just okay, we have a new solution, we have a new three-letter word within the company, and it's going to solve everything. So then when you look at the list of requirements, there's a lot of things like pricing we can do within the PIM. We can do all kind of things within the PIM, which a PIM, okay, when you work around, and some PIMs do things like this, and you can make some adjustment and things. But look into what's really the function of a product information management solution in relation to PLM, in relation to ERP, in relation to what your company needs in functionalities, and that's when a company has no experience with PIM, we have to adjust these things quite a lot. When they do have experience with a former PIM, with an earlier PIM within the company, it's mostly because the PIM was implemented not in the right way, and they struggled with things. Uh, they know something is not going all right, but they're not always able to pinpoint what the, the flaws are and what the issues are. So our role is mostly also to look into their requirements and say, okay, this requirement, it's a valid requirement for you, but it shouldn't be addressed within the PIM area. We should separate it and look into more into to the total architecture of your company, and maybe an ERP should solve this issue, or a PLM should solve this issue, or whatever. But that's what I see. We have all kind of requirements which are not always um, pinpointed at the PIM solution or the PIM environment.
Yeah.
I think it's also becoming quite difficult if you are making that selection with the newer terminology like PXM and so on, as to work out what you're actually looking for, because the PIM that maybe you chose, if you're replacing 10 years ago compared to the PIM of today, it's evolved so much, and as you say, what you can do within that has changed. But just because that solution offers it or you've seen it, do you actually need it? And I think that's a really important thing to think about is, are you looking for what I would consider to be a PIM that does catalog management, or are you looking at something that does so much more, like supplier onboarding, maybe thinking about syndication and so on? So it's really understanding, what do you mean within your organization
Yeah.
by PIM? And I think that's what you were saying as well. But of course, we are seeing an evolution within the space to extend out the capabilities of even just maybe a more niche PIM will have things like DAM built in and so on. So it's becoming quite difficult from a requirements perspective to unpick what you can actually do within that as well. And I think, to your point of, does that sit inside the ERP? Does that sit inside the PLM? It becomes quite difficult to unpick what you're expecting from the actual PIM solution.
Yeah.
So it's educational as well.
But it's also like, what do you mean with DAM, or what do
Yes.
you mean with this feature? I think understanding the requirements, and not just from your current set of requirements, but I think one mistake we also see is that if you look back only at what you're currently using and currently doing, um, it is a great starting point, but a PIM, or maybe any IT solution, but a PIM solution specifically, as it is such an embedded tooling in the heart of your organization, will stick with you for 7, maybe 10 years, if you do it right, at least. So you also want to make sure you don't choose a PIM that is too narrowly defined. You want to look at your ambitions and look at your markets, not next year, but 3 to 5 years from now, and see if that PIM still can serve those ambitions, without a hitch. You don't want to feel like you're in a straitjacket 3, 4 years from now.
What you
So
say, what what you're saying is it's the heart of your organization, and I think you're right saying that. But when you are at the table with ERP people, and they think they're the heart of the organization, so it's all a matter of perception, and what are the viewpoints. So you need to build together this viewpoint on what is a PIM, what does it do for your organization, how does it fit in your organization, where does it make life easier for your ERP environment, etc., etc. So people are afraid of always afraid of changing things, and I think we should take away or try to take away this kind of fear within the organization.
yeah, that's a good point. I mean, it is that is one step, right? And looking back and looking forward is one thing. I also see, when you then take the results of these discovery processes or analysis within the organization, you get a long list of requirements. And what we usually see is, depending on which organization led that discovery, it is maybe 50 requirements from IT, but 200 from marketing, if marketing leads the discovery, and vice versa. If IT leads the discovery, they come up with the 200 requirements. Mm, I the risk that I see is that, do you actually understand what you mean with a requirement like that, right? What is it that you really want? um, okay, single sign-on is pretty straightforward, but we want the application to have a dam available. Okay, what is a dam, right? Or we want to have workflows to manage our process. Okay, what is a workflow? How do you define that step? How are you going to use that requirement in practice? That's where I see a lot of confusion happening also, and a disconnect between what people then determine that they need from a sort of requirements perspective, and from what they believe, looking back and looking forward from an ambition point of view. But what do they mean with the list that they then have built?
That's a really important point. I think it's understanding what does that capability look like in your organization, and the importance of it as well. And I think, for me, if you're submitting some sort of checklist with 255 or 500 questions in it, I think you're missing the point there. I think it should be, yes, of course, you can talk about workflows and so on, but what does that mean for your organization? How are you going to be using that capability? I always think you need to turn it around, because we all know, we've been in this area for quite some time, that the capabilities are quite similar, or most of the vendors that you're looking at can offer the same things. It's how they do it, but does it meet your way of working, and how easy is that for people to actually pick up and look at? I think the most successful criteria that people put forward are, can you show me how you can solve this problem, or can you tell me how your solution would fix our most pressing pain point, but also, if we want to do this in the future, how can we pivot? I Not that I dislike massive RFPs, but I really sometimes wonder, what are you going to do with those different 500 questions at the end of it? How are you going to compare that? Because, and we all know that a lot of the times everyone will just say yes, that they can do it. So I think it's a really difficult thing to take a massive requirement list and present it like that. And I don't know from your experience with helping people with this, whether sometimes you just think, really, you've given me these 500 questions and you expect the vendors to all do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can answer that because this is what also where I come from 10 years ago, 15 years ago, because that was the way companies wanted you also to compare software solutions. That's the way it was. And we turned it around saying, okay, uh, all those details, maybe they are important, but what do you mean by the details? That's the question you already asked. But we changed it and say, okay, what are the most important scenarios which you want to which you want to solve? What are the issues you want to solve within the companies? And can we then make a scenario out of this which can be shown by some vendors? Then they're all on the same level. They're all have the same requirements from you as a company. We provide some data, and you can show this scenario, and then you have a feeling, okay, everybody can do this, but they do it in a different way, and one way is maybe more connected with your company than another way of working. So that's, I think that's a more natural way of going from a more broader perspective to more detailed requirements, because in the end the detailed requirements also matter. The detailed requirement on technical connections, the detailed requirement on all kind of modeling things, but in the end the user wants to have an issue which needs to be solved, and not a list of requirements.
I mean, it's, as you say, it's really important to ask things like, who's got the best workflow, who's got the strongest data model. I mean, they're really important questions, but they're not the ones that maybe will determine your success. I think that's really, you've got to be thinking about that whatever you choose, and as Stefan said, it's going to be with you for hopefully with you for 7 to 10 years. So it's really important that you feel comfortable with who you've chosen. And I mean, I think, and as you were saying, it's really how is this going to work in practice in my business with my data and the scale that I have. And I think whilst you may have those massive list of requirements, of course it's important that it can do the things that you would expect it to do. But can it do it for what you're trying to achieve? And I think that's sometimes the disconnect, which is why you need to really think about when you're talking to the vendors, can they actually do it in my scenario, which is what you were saying, Chris. Give them data, talk about the things that you're trying to solve. That way you can think, yes, I can see this actually delivering the improvements, the speed, the changes, the efficiency that I'm looking for from this solution. Because at the end of the day, you're not investing just to have better workflows, you're investing to make everything work for the business. So I think that's, for me, the most important thing. I don't know if you agree there, but it's much more around, does it work for me in my scenarios?
Yeah, then we're coming to actually to the same conclusion. There is no best PIM. It's
No?
how it works for me as a company, and not just today, but also looking forward.
It's very hard to disagree, Helen. I think we all see those 500 questionnaire Excel sheets. Yeah, and I think they come from a good place, right? You think you need a PIM, that's great. You evaluate what you have and where the bottlenecks are. You do surveys and research with your team, and from that comes a list of requirements that you think are very important. But we also discussed that it is the translation of this list to actual use cases that is actually important, not the list itself, because the interpretation of every line, they tell a story. Um, actually, or behind them is a story that you're not telling in this spreadsheet. And what your team means by these five requirements together is then interpreted by a vendor who then also needs to match that to his understanding of those requirements. And without that story, it's very difficult to get to a match. To Without that scenario, it's very difficult to get a good match and a good grasp. It's it's I mean, it's a bit of a cliche, but if you create that list of 500 questionnaires, you ask your team to, sorry, 500 requirements, a questionnaire of 500 requirements, you ask your team to evaluate which ones they need, which ones are must-haves, and which ones are nice to have. 90% will be must-have, 10% is a nice to have, and they then send that list to five vendors who use AI to answer all those questions. Um, they can do everything, and everything they can't do, they can make happen for you within a few weeks of integration time or with a partner. So the actual informational value is zero, right? You wasted a lot of time or tokens maybe, and you're actually not one step further. You feel like you're in control, but you're actually not getting any results.
I mean,
Unfortunately.
it's
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely that. And I think, yes, of course, you need to know what you're looking for from a tool. But I do feel that, and this may be controversial, the days of RFPs of that scale should be over, really. It should be much more a practical view. I mean, of course, the demo of how the solution works is incredibly important, but that's you can have a fantastic clean demo where it looks amazing, but it's not really showing you the reality of how it actually works within your environment. And I think Chris touched on a really important point: is will it fit into, how easy does it connect into your existing ecosystem? And I think that's something that I feel is often overlooked: is does the do the vendors that you're looking at have the connectors to actually work with what you have right now, and how easy is that to set up? Because you're not going to swap everything out just to make sure that the PIM works. It's, can it actually sit within that, in your existing environment? And I think that for me is sometimes not glossed over, but not really explored in the depth that it needs to be,
Yeah.
because you've got to really think about how easy is this going to be, whatever it is that you choose to get the value from when you've made that investment. Maybe I'm jumping ahead, but I'm really thinking about when you're asking those questions, you can ask who else has done something like this, who else has got the same number of SKUs, who else has got the same complexity. Can that vendor give you the confidence that they understand maybe your messy environment? Not that I'm saying everyone's got a messy environment, but everybody is different, which is why I think we're always going to come back to say there is no one perfect PIM.
Yeah.
Everybody is going to see different things that they need in all of those 250 plus vendors.
And we all want to have this ideal environment where there is an integration layer and blah blah blah, all kind of things. And we all know it's, well, sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not. So you have to look into what situation do we have at hand, and how do we need to plug in this PIM or DAM, and is there already another DAM solution? That's also a question. There's a lot of questions to be answered before you can come up with even a suggestion of a short list.
Yeah. But I think so you need to translate those lists of requirements into those scenarios, as Chris already mentioned. Um, how many scenarios do you need to cover to get a good grasp if you want to get that data from either the well, maybe their initial feedback on a scenario? I think what we usually do is we share the scenarios and we let vendors do a scenario driven demo. But what number of scenarios would you need to have to get a good grasp of the match, basically?
Actually, that's depends a lot on the complexity of your organization, and also you can define 7 scenario, 10 scenarios, 20 scenarios. Does it give you more information than when you do 5 scenarios. Try to look for maybe some simple scenarios, but also some complex scenarios, and limit it to, let's say, 4 or 5 scenarios. Uh, and based on that, you can have a good view on what the capabilities are, how the way of working is within the solution. And do you buy a PIM solution with one demo? Mostly not. So start with 4 or 5 scenarios, and then when you build trust, when you build understanding within the company, you can say, okay, but having seen all of this with 3 or 4 PIM solutions, I saw something in demo number 4 which I haven't seen in one. Can we have another demo and seeing also this functionality, because we didn't know we were going to ask this, or we were going to see this. So it's always maybe 2 or even 3 uh, contact points before there is actually going to be a solution, buying a new PIM solution, because you don't buy it for 1 year or 2 years. It's a long-term decision.
I would also, with the scenarios point of view, think about not just focusing on one area of the business when you're pulling those together, because the PIM is not just going to be for one particular user or one particular use case. Is to think about who else do you need within your organization to actually get behind this purchase or this or maybe this replacement, so that you've got more of a, maybe that's later on, but you've got more of a broad buy-in or understanding of potential use cases that the PIM could solve. Maybe not straight away, but maybe in 6 months or a year's time. Because I think the more people across the organisation who can see the value from it, it will really help strengthen the decisions. And of course, some things that matter to one part of the organisation don't matter to another. So that can be really difficult when you're building those scenarios as well, is to really think about which are the ones that maybe are for now, short term, and maybe things that you're thinking about long term. So it can be quite a process of, as Chris suggested, starting with 4 and then deep diving further in, I think is really important, because it's, if you're buying after one demo, you're not evaluating it properly. That's just my feelings on the subject.
Yeah, it's more entertainment than actual informative if you
Mm,
if you just have one demo, especially if it's a vanilla type demo,
mm.
right, where they just show the highlights of the amazing tooling. They show how the AI integrates. They show how smoothly the workflow works from onboarding all the way to publication, and it looks amazing. But that's that's great. You had a 1 hour entertainment session from someone probably very good at his job or her job to showcase you the solution that they offer. But for
But there's
you, for
nothing
your
wrong with those demos, by the way. I think
no,
sometimes they're really important for you to think, do I, and the other thing that I really feel people underestimate is, do they like the look of the solution? Because you've got to go, you're going to be working on that day in, day out. Do you feel comfortable and confident in the way that you can work through it? I mean, I know it's ridiculous, but you've got to be thinking about the end user experience of, is this something that you feel that your users are actually going to want to work with on a day-to-day basis? So those 1 hour vanilla demos are really good at maybe determining whether it's a yes or no moving forward, because you can go, well, that looks quite complicated, or that user experience is great, and I can really see that somebody wants to get behind that. So, even though we can say, oh, it's a vanilla demo, in some cases it will help you. Maybe you might start with a long list of 10 vendors. Hopefully you don't, but you might. But it might help you slim that down to the 5 that you really feel will resonate for your organization. Maybe it's because the interface looks like something else you've already got, or that you've got maybe more technical users and they have different requirements. So, as Chris said, it's going to be multiple demos, but the vanilla one can be really good at maybe
Yeah.
whittling down the ones that you don't actually think will be a good fit.
what we often do is because some companies they already have experience with PIM solutions, or some companies they are looking into a PIM solution for let's say half a year. They have some demos, vanilla demos, but others they're more limited, and especially not all of the participants in the selection process have the knowledge about PIM. Then we start often with a vanilla demo, just to have the feeling what a PIM can do, and not just from one solution, but multiple solutions, so they can see the differences. And then we gather the information to prepare scenarios. People are already more aware what they can expect from the PIM solution, and with those scenarios, we are going into a more deep dive for the scenario based demos, and which the scenario based demos we have a scoring mechanism, and even more important, we ask people to put remarks by their scoring, because that's more even more valuable. Why do you score an 8? Why does someone else score a 5 in this point? We want to have this discussion internally with all the participants, because in the end everybody needs to be happy. You cannot be happy on 100% of all the items, but you want to have a consensus uh, for a selection.
It depends on how you use the vanilla demos, right? So there's nothing wrong with doing a vanilla demo and keeping it as it is, using it as entertainment or using it as education. And especially as education, it's a great place to start and start understanding the PIM space, right? But using it as the only touch point in a decision making process, that's where I'll draw the line and say, hey, that's not how you should run these things. But for sure, I think we usually see with our clients that um, while we are collecting the input for the scenario for the scenarios, or just shortly after, we do a first 1 hour introduction with all the different vendors that we have on the short list, so that you can have all the stakeholders get a feeling of what's out there, right? So they have maybe their own tooling as context, be that ERP or even a dedicated PIM, but an older solution. But you want to show the world and see what is out there, and maybe even use that as input, as Chris already mentioned, for other deep dive scenarios or deep dive demos, either the immediate scenario demos or separate deep dive demos on certain topics, because they will inspire you. The vanilla demos will inspire you with requirements or with features you haven't thought about before. That said, you have the requirements, you distill them into scenarios, you share that with your shortlist, you plan a quick introductory demo, knowing that you will have a deep dive demo later. You score those deep dive demos with a scoring list so you can compare. Is that enough to make the right call? How
No,
does it go from there?
no, I think for me, of course, it's the demo and so on. That's really important. But I think we're missing a really important point within this selection criteria, which is around how is choosing this particular vendor or this particular set of criteria going to really help me? Because at the end of the day, you're going to have to get someone to pay for this. So you need to be thinking about taking all this into consideration. Do I already have a business case put forward for the spend? I mean, price, of course, is very important, and everybody has different pricing. We haven't really touched on that. But you would really be thinking about what are the success criteria? How can I measure the importance of this, as the success of this? I think that's something that you really need to bring up during the evaluation, to sort of ask the vendor, how can, by implementing this particular tool, what will improve? How can we look at things like operations metrics that are going to improve? What the business outcomes will make us really think that we've made the right decision here? I think it's lovely to look at the demo. That's great, but how are you going to actually take what happens when you've bought the PIM and really showcase to the business that this was the right thing to do. I think that's where we sometimes get so caught up in the features and functionality. We're not thinking about how do we define success if we choose this particular solution. I don't know if this is something that you bring up, but I've always said, and particularly when I was talking to clients when I was at Gartner, you've got to be thinking about the outcomes of making this selection and what will good look like, and is this the right tool to really drive success in the business. I don't know this is the right place to talk about that, but I do feel that getting so caught up in the RFP and the demo, lovely, but one of the really important things is this choice going to help me drive really make a big impact on the business?
Yeah. How do you get to that answer then, Helen? So you need to tie it back into a business case. I think for PIM, this is sometimes harder than for more
Yes.
front facing solutions where like a commerce solution, it's easier to build a business case than for PIM, which usually sits more on the cost saving side instead of on the revenue generation side, even though I beg to differ, and we could have a separate session maybe on specifically on that. But how do you build that business case, and how do you start that?
I mean, for me, I think you have to be really honest about where your problems are right now. You have to be very sort of transparent about if things have gone wrong. You know, what impact has that had on the organization? I think, if you are starting from scratch, what are you expecting the PIM to help you deliver? Is it faster time to market for your products? Is it making sure that you have consistency? I think it's going back to what are the KPIs that you're expecting to measure, because that's what you want to be putting forward for the business cases. If we spend X amount on the PIM itself and the implementation, which we haven't got time to cover, but we will have to cover at another point, what is that investment going to look like? What is my return on that? How can I measure the success of this project? Because that's what you're going to need to do from a business case perspective, and is to be saying, well, we've got, say, for example, 60% completeness in our data right now. With a PIM, we're going to expect to get, 95%. We know it's never going to be 100, but these are the things that you're going to need to think about, asking. But also, when you're talking to the vendors, have they got use cases that can help you say, oh, this was a customer that had the same issues or the same volume, and so on. So I think it's thinking about those metrics that you can tie back to actually getting the sign off for the project. Hopefully, if you're getting to this point and you're doing all of this, you've already got sign off. But we all know that sometimes we get right to the end of all of this and they're suddenly going, oh, we haven't actually got a business case for this yet. So it's all very well, but are you actually at that point to get the sign off for it? I don't know if this is what you meant by that, but for me, it's all around what the business outcomes are so
Yeah,
that you can get that
and
sign
there
off.
are
And I
several
think we
aspects.
forget that.
There are several aspects within this business case. It all depends on the required functionality, on the current state of the. So you need to have the current state of your company. And as an example, we produce a catalog every year. There is half an FTE or one FTE per year busy with producing this catalog. Can we reduce this? And how can we prove that it's going to be reduced? Things like that. And then quite often you can see, okay, it's not just an investment, but also a saving on these kind of things. And then building up this use case is very important with the company, with the requirements they have within the company. But you need also, and that's what you already mentioned, Helen, you need clarity, you need honesty, you need really people saying, okay, this is the current state, we want to improve it, and how can we do this?
And I know we aren't going to talk about implementation, but I do think it's really important that when you're doing the evaluation of the vendors, that you are also evaluating the implementation partners at the same
Yep.
time. And I've always said it's like a dating game, it's like a marriage, because you are choosing somebody. The vendor maybe not, I'm not going to say it's not as long, of course it's important, but you won't be spending as much time with the vendor as you will with the implementation partner. So it's very important to make sure that when you're making the choice of which PIM, that you're, I'm going to say, spending more time thinking about who's going to implement it for you, because that is where the success of the program happens. And I think that sometimes when we're looking at the capability list, fantastic, but for the RFP as well, it's making sure that when you choose the vendor, that you've got the right person to implement it, or the right um, uh, SI or whoever you choose to work with you to do that. And I think that is sometimes overlooked. And in my opinion, controversially, I feel the implementation partner is actually more important than the vendor. And I'm just going to leave that there.
Yeah.
I know
Yeah.
we weren't going to really get into that today because I think that's a
No, I mean,
whole other discussion.
it is true that it is not a. It depends, of course, on which level you're in. Like most startups have PIM solutions that you can self onboard on, but
Mm-hmm.
when you start hitting mid market and especially in enterprise, that you need to have a partner that understands that complexity and takes you along in the journey of the implementation. But it is a long term relationship. They will stick around to do configuration and updates and small process changes with you for the coming 10 years. And it is a marriage with three partners, which makes it interesting and not legal in most jurisdictions. But you're stuck in good times and in bad with that partnership of three. And
Yeah,
I
and
also
I want to add maybe a fourth one,
mm,
because you have the PIM as a solution, which you can have in a box. You have a PIM, you have, but you have also the integrations, and that's something which is so important, because a PIM without integrations doesn't function. So, is the implementation partner of the PIM also an integrator or not? If not, who is going to do the integration? Is this your internal IT department, or is this an external IT provider?
yeah,
So that's also an important part. So it's a complex puzzle of fitting together all kind of companies and all kind of people who need to work on this project. It needs to be governed very, very, very good.
And that's a really important point as well around the integrations are how many are out of the box, as in, do they already have pre-built connectors? Have they done it before? But also, as you say, are there things that you're going to have to build? But again, we all know that people will swap certain things. They may change their CMS. They may change. Hopefully, they won't change. They may be going through an ERP transformation, a whole other topic. So it's making sure that that it's not just for now, but if you know you're going to be swapping to something in a year or 2 years, that they have that ability to make sure that that's a smooth transition as well. So absolutely, I think you're right. There's four people within this whole, or four different components to this sort of selection and relationship building, because it is a relationship. As you know, as you said, it can be rocky, it can be beautiful and harmonious, but it's got to make sure that that is the right choice for you as well. So I think it's the integration piece is sometimes very much overlooked or underestimated, because also, are you thinking of doing it yourself? Which, do you have the right people there to do it? And you're right with the fact that you may not need a partner for doing it if you're taking a more smaller compact PIM that maybe is self set up. But also, again, you want to be checking things like their documentation and how they do that as well. So there are other components for when you're making that selection that are not just capabilities. It's the wraparound, training, support, all of these other things come into the factor of making the decision, which is incredibly important. Do they have, 24/7 support that you can access? If you are a global company, so many other components that fit into this selection criteria.
Yeah, let alone data cleansing from things. There are, well, a lot of things going on. Maybe that's a topic for another podcast, I think, because that's
another
also
set of non-functional requirements and
yeah.
implementation partner selection. I think that it's actually a great topic for a follow-up. Let's try and make it more um, maybe bring back some overview, right? Because we've expanded the complexity a lot in the past 50 minutes. How can we now bring it back to small steps that everyone can take tomorrow or whenever they're in a PIM selection process? Where should they start to make sure they select the right PIM? That's for sure. Make sure they select the right partner. Make sure they choose the right integration path and maybe a different partner there as well. How can we bring it back to next steps that people can take when they are listening to this and want to continue with their PIM journey tomorrow?
I
I think
think my
starting.
biggest. Oh, you go,
Sorry,
Chris.
sorry. Starting is getting the right people together within the company, because it's not just from one department, and that's maybe one department is the initiator, but it's all people within the company, all departments which are involved in product data. I think that's a very important thing.
I think my biggest takeaway really is that a feature checklist will tell you what the system can do, but it doesn't tell you what your organization will actually achieve. And I think that's the biggest thing I would say is you, of course, can spend ages pulling together that 500 question RFP. Is it really going to help you with your selection?
Yeah, that's a good point. If I can then distill both your points and of the whole conversation into maybe one sort of key takeaway, it is always keep the end in mind, right? Start with the end in mind, go through the demos with the end in mind, do the return on investment calculation with the end in mind, and choose a partner and integration scheme that works
Yeah.
with the end in mind.
And the end, I should say, is not the selection itself, but going over the coming years, what do I want to achieve, and what is the best fit for this, but have this end goal over multiple years, I should say.
True. And make sure that the end goal is aligned, not just your end goal or your department's end goal, but that it is a shared end goal of the whole organization.
And I think one other thing to think about
Yeah,
along those lines is the vendor that you're choosing going to be good for just now, or can they offer you more capabilities in the future that you might potentially need? And if you don't need them, don't get caught up in the fact that they may have 4 or 5 different offerings or other modules that they're trying to sell to you. Because if you don't need them, choose something that's more simple and meets your requirements. Because that's what I've seen a lot of, is people getting caught up in seeing a huge ecosystem of different solutions that they will never ever use. That's another thing to really think about as well.
yeah. Yeah, I agree. And we can touch the user interface here again. And we can,
Yeah.
I mean, let's schedule that another session on this, on the non-functionals of PIM selection, because I feel we focused a lot on the actual requirements and what a tool should do and how you make sure you choose a PIM that matches your functional requirements and matches your, well, the goal, and has the end in mind for the coming 5 to 10 years, not just the coming 2 years or just for the selection. Let's schedule one that covers those non-functional requirements and touch on this top subject again. And yeah, I would say thanks a lot for joining us today and sharing your wisdom and bringing back all that complexity that we touched back into a few tips that people can take away from this conversation and apply immediately. But if they have follow-up questions, I think, Helen, they will be pretty easy to find you on LinkedIn. I share your profile in the comments if people want to visit you and send you a quick message or connect. Same is true for Chris. I shared your profile as well. So if you have any questions that are more PIM related, you can also reach out to me or to Chris, as always. And of course, subscribe to our podcast either on this platform that you're listening to right now, or Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. See you in the next one and have a great day. Thank you.
Thanks so much.